bulletproof heavy shield, a few centimeters thick, folded right before my eyes into an exaggerated V shape. I was staring dead at the back of Vanguard Kevin's head. Just a moment ago, he was holding that ceramic composite shield, supposedly capable of deflecting even large-caliber sniper rounds. But in that split second, something thicker than a bucket slammed down from the darkness, carrying a nauseating, rancid stench. It moved so fast that the helmet camera couldn't even capture it clearly. All I heard was a loud clang, and Kevin looked like he'd been hit head-on by a heavy pile driver. The metal edge of that heavy shield, under the intense pressure, instantly sent several hot fragments flying. One of them grazed right past my helmet. Kevin didn't even let out a peep. His left arm, bracing the shield, produced a series of dull cracks, like dry branches being snapped underfoot. I watched helplessly as his combat suit sleeve bulged with sharp protrusions from the bone fragments inside, his entire arm twisting limply into an angle that was impossible to look at. That shadow didn't stop. There were 3 fists covered in grayish-white hard shells. One of them was still pressing down on the center of the deformed shield, driving Kevin into the ground like a nail being hammered. The high-intensity flashlight in my hand swung wildly with my body's shaking, the beam sweeping over part of that monster. It had a texture that was gray, like rock or some kind of carapace. The force it exerted downward was absurd. The rusty railroad tracks I was standing on let out a screeching plea for help, the sound of metal being crushed flat. Kevin's knees hit the concrete floor with 2 heavy thuds. I could even feel the ground trembling slightly under my feet. The thing's other hand swept in from an angle above, the force of it making the air sting. I instinctively leaned back, and the flashlight beam landed right on that fist. Its surface was covered in layers of hard skin, each joint bulging like a small ball, smeared with that sticky black liquid from underground. I gasped for air, trying to shout Kevin's name, but my throat was so dry it felt like it was on fire, and not a single word came out. My teammate ahead of me, a big guy weighing nearly 200 pounds, now looked tiny under the crushing force of those 3 hands, like an aluminum can about to be flattened. The shield kept deforming, the sound of twisting metal echoing through the pitch-black tunnel, each noise hitting me right in the chest. Kevin's helmet was tilted to the side, his face pressed against the deformed ceramic plate, his entire body squeezed into the corner by that immense physical force. I desperately tried to raise my rifle, but the monster was just too big. Just crouching there, it almost filled the entire tunnel. Its arms, thick as beams, kept exerting force, and I could even hear the plates of Kevin's bulletproof vest cracking one by one. The sound was crisp, but in the dead silence of this deep mine, it was louder than a bomb. I just stood there, watching as that shield was slowly pressed into Kevin's chest, watching his combat boots kick feebly against the ground. Just half an hour ago, we were bickering on the helicopter. Back then, it was still bright outside. Kevin sat across from me, fiddling with that ridiculously heavy shield of his. He bragged to me that this thing was custom-made, and if danger came, all I had to do was hide behind him. Even a tank shell would bounce off. Everyone was laughing then. No one took this mission to search for the missing scientific team seriously. But once we entered this underground mine, that easygoing vibe was gradually devoured by the shadows here. The air here was strange. Breathing it in felt sticky, like something was stuck in my throat. I shone my flashlight on the rock walls, and everywhere I looked, there was this translucent stuff, exactly like the snot from a cold, oozing down the cracks. Followed the rusty railroad tracks deeper in, our boots splashing through the puddles. With every step, the tracks let out a piercing metallic screech that sent chills up my spine. As we walked, I noticed a few thick solid steel pipes lying by the side. These pipes were originally used to support the tunnel, but now they were all twisted into spiral shapes. I crouched down for a closer look. The brakes on those pipes were perfectly smooth, as if some incredibly strong monster had snapped them with its bare hands. How much strength would that take? I reached out to compare. My 2 hands together couldn't even wrap around one of those pipes. It was dead quiet around us. Aside from our footsteps, the only other sound was a low hum, like a heavy machine running next door, always seeping out from behind the rock walls. That sound would swell and fade, making your heart race. We continued downward all the way to the 5th underground level. The path suddenly narrowed here, with stone walls on both sides slowly closing in. As my flashlight beam swept ahead, a massive circular hole appeared, at least 2 meters in diameter. The edges of the opening were jagged and chaotic. It was clear this hole had been smashed through by something huge, with no drill in sight. Kevin took a deep breath and once again positioned the heavy shield in front of him. He shot me a glance, signaling he'd take the lead. I followed closely behind, pressing the barrel of my rifle against the edge of the shield. We moved slowly, inching our way into the narrow passage. Then, a strange sound reached us. It was deep and heavy, like dozens of tons of stone being dragged across rough concrete. Screech, screech. Each groan carried a weight that felt capable of crushing the ground. I shifted my flashlight toward the edge of the hole, illuminating something pale. It was a shell wedged in a crevice, white as a corpse's face. I reached out and touched it, hard as marble, with deep grooves etched across its surface. Just as we were about to retreat from the suffocatingly narrow space, movement came from above. Tiny stones and dust pattered down, landing right on my helmet. I slowly looked up, directing my flashlight beam straight overhead. The massive, heavy sound of breathing echoed less than 10 centimeters above my head. Inhale, exhale. Each breath carried the stench of rotting salted fish, blowing directly onto the back of my neck. I knew something was clinging to the ceiling, watching me. In that instant, the back of my neck felt as if it were on fire, the foul odor threatening to fill my lungs. I didn't dare raise my head fully, catching only a glimpse of a huge, pale blur out of the corner of my eye. The shadow plummeted from directly above the passage with the force of a collapsing mountain. A deafening crash followed. The iron rails on the ground were stomped into the dirt like soft noodles the moment the creature landed, the sound of snapping metal echoing through the narrow mine shaft. Kevin stood at the very front. He didn't even have time to cry out before the monster's fist slammed into his impossibly heavy shield. I saw it clearly. The impact seemed to unfold in slow motion. The metal surface caved inward. Then the thick ceramic plates began to shatter in large chunks, emitting an unbearable screech. Under the force, Kevin's body was violently thrown backward. His shoulder let out a dull crack, the bone collapsing like a walnut smashed by a sledgehammer. I didn't hesitate. I squeezed the trigger of my rifle, firing relentlessly at the white behemoth. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark mine shaft. Each bullet striking the monster produced a metallic clang. I watched as the rounds hit its grayish-white exoskeleton, sparking bright flashes. The bullets left only shallow white marks before ricocheting wildly, hissing as they struck the surrounding rock. The creature raised its head, and I finally saw its face. It resembled a human, but no human looked like that. It had 3 pairs of arms, 6 in total, each thicker than my waist, covered in rigid muscle. Its lower 2 pairs braced against the walls, while the upper pair pinned Kevin down. It let out a bizarre shriek, like rusted metal grinding violently. Then one of its hands grabbed a nearby heavy-duty winch. The winch was welded from thick steel plates and weighed at least several tons. But the monster lifted it as if it were a feather pillow, swinging it toward us. "Move!" I shouted at the top of my lungs, diving to the ground. But another teammate beside me wasn't fast enough. The massive winch, whistling through the air, crashed down on him. I heard a sickening sound, the sound of human bones being crushed under tons of metal, like dry firewood run over by a heavy truck. The winch's iron shell completely covered the teammate, splattering mud and gravel onto my face. The monster didn't stop. It began moving through the narrow passage. Its movements were absurdly fast, completely unlike what you'd expect from something so massive. Its remaining hands clawed into the crevices of the rock wall, and it scuttled sideways across the surface like a giant white crab. The beam from my flashlight couldn't keep up at all. All I could see was a huge white shadow flickering at the edge of the light. I scrambled backward frantically, yanking a flashbang from my chest rig, pulling the pin, and hurling it forward. Eyes shut, a blindingly intense light exploded through the tunnel. In that extreme glare, the creature's outline was illuminated in stark detail. Its skin was covered in rough, uneven keratin, with long, slender spikes in places. The deafening blast of the flashbang made it hesitate for a split second, its 6 arms flailing wildly at the air around it. Seizing the moment, I rushed to the teammate pinned under the winch, trying desperately to pull him free. But the machine was far too heavy. There was no way I could move that weight alone. I saw his hand, trapped outside the metal casing, clawing uselessly at the loose gravel on the ground, his nails digging into the dirt. "Fall back. Get back now," the captain's voice roared from behind. I watched as the creature shook off the disorientation, its lidless eyes fixed on me from within the lingering afterglow of the flash. One of its hands suddenly snatched up a broken section of rail track. It had to weigh at least several dozen pounds, but it held it like a chopstick. It swung the rail toward me, the rush of air so strong I could barely keep my eyes open. I threw myself sideways with everything I had. The rail smashed into the rock wall behind me with a thunderous crash, shattering a huge chunk of stone into fragments that peppered my protective suit like bullets. A searing pain shot through my left arm, definitely hit by flying debris. By then, the creature had shifted its attention from the winch to Kevin. Kevin was still struggling beneath his shield, his injured arm twisted at an unnatural angle. The monster reached out with 2 massive hands, gripping the edges of the battered shield, and with a grunt, it heaved. What happened next is burned into my memory forever. That specially made, supposedly indestructible ballistic shield tore apart in its hands like a piece of soaked cardboard. The screech of rending metal rang in my ears. It tossed the 2 halves aside, then grabbed Kevin by the collar with one hand, lifting him into the air like a rag doll. Kevin kicked helplessly in midair, his rifle long gone. I screamed his name and fired at the creature's face again. Bullet after bullet struck its pale gray head, leaving visible dents, but the thing didn't even flinch. It simply waved a hand in my direction, as if swatting away an annoying fly. The sheer force of its presence drove me back. My foot caught on a stray magazine, and I fell backward into a puddle. As I hit the ground, I saw the creature slam Kevin hard against the wall. Kevin's body struck the solid rock with a sickening thud before sliding down, motionless. The creature turned its head, its 6 arms spreading wide, filling my entire field of vision. It slowly leaned down, one massive fist raised, aimed directly at my head. I could feel its foul breath hitting my ballistic visor. My rifle clicked empty, the dry, final sound of no ammunition left. I stared at that armored fist, watching it coil back, the air thick with the hopeless, grinding sound of its movement. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the cold rock wall. Just before that fist came down, the captain hurled a large block of explosives from behind, landing it right at the creature's feet. A deafening boom followed, flames painting the entire tunnel red. As the blast wave knocked the creature off balance, I grabbed Kevin's unconscious body and dragged him back with all my strength. The captain and the machine gunner laid down covering fire behind us, spent casings clattering to the ground in a continuous metallic rain. We retreated into a half-collapsed mining chamber, and the captain swiftly planted the remaining explosives at the entrance. Several more muffled explosions later, the entrance was completely sealed by rubble. The creature didn't follow us in. The room fell into an eerie silence. We slumped on the floor, gasping for air, our chests heaving like bellows. Kevin was slumped against the corner, drenched in sweat, his shattered arm hanging limply over his knee. I quickly pulled a tactical tourniquet from my pack and wrapped it tightly above his wound, securing the mess of broken bones. Kevin trembled with pain, but he clenched his teeth, not letting out a single sound. The captain switched off the high-powered flashlight, leaving only a few dim red indicator lights. The red glow flickered across our faces. In a hushed voice, he whispered that the creature might just be a guard beast, possibly with poor eyesight, relying mostly on its hearing. He warned us to stay quiet, rest here for now, and wait for the outside to settle before figuring out our next move. Everyone held their breath, eyes fixed on the pile of rocks blocking the entrance. A minute passed without a sound from outside. The deafening demolition noises that had been ringing in our ears vanished, replaced only by the steady drip of water from the mine ceiling. Asterisk plink, plink. Asterisk I leaned against the wall, gripping my empty rifle tightly, my palms slick with cold sweat. Just as I thought we might catch a break, I noticed something strange. I looked down and saw the murky water in the puddle at my feet rippling slightly. The ripples were rhythmic, 1, 2, as if something heavy in the distance was pounding the ground with a steady beat. But I couldn't hear a thing. I turned my gaze toward the rubble blocking the doorway. From the gaps in the rocks, a translucent, mucus-like slime began oozing in. It flowed slowly, almost alive, creeping down the edges of the stones. I reached out to touch it and found it was warm, emitting faint wisps of white steam. Then, the largest capstone I was staring at began to move. It was a granite slab weighing at least 200 pounds. It wasn't being pushed inward or toppling outward. Instead, it was being shifted sideways, millimeter by millimeter, as if something outside was gently pinching it. The whole process was utterly silent. The harsh grating of stone against stone was strangely absent. Slowly, I raised my hand and pointed. The captain saw it too. His eyes widened, his pistol gripped tightly. In the faint red light, I watched as several grayish-white, hook-like claws, the same color as the creature's shell, slid through the topmost gap in the rubble. They moved with eerie dexterity, like fingers playing a piano, silently gripping the edges of the stones and lifting them away one by one. The air around us seemed to grow heavier. That low, heavy machinery hum we'd heard earlier returned, vibrating up through the floor, louder than before. I could almost feel the creature pressed against the other side of the rubble, silently dismantling our only barrier with its soundless movements. Those rocks were never meant to hold it back. I stared at those grayish-white claws as they effortlessly lifted the massive granite slab from the top, like popping the tab off a soda can. Then, the entire collapsed stone wall, brought down by explosives, toppled inward like a stack of dominoes. Dust blotted out the red indicator lights, and all I could hear was the thunderous crash of rocks hitting the ground. The massive creature squeezed sideways through the gap. Its movements weren't clumsy at all. Instead, it was so fast my eyes could barely follow. I emptied the remaining rounds in my rifle into it, but they only left smoking white marks on its thick, pale shell. The shell was still streaked with black scorch marks from the explosion, but they were flaking away, revealing an even harder, shinier layer beneath. Its 3 pairs of limbs worked with terrifying coordination. The lower 4 limbs slammed into the concrete ceiling like giant gecko feet, and the creature hung upside down, its belly facing our heads. The upper pair, closest to its head, casually gripped 2 load-bearing steel beams ripped from the wall. Those solid, thick steel girders looked like slender pointers in its grasp, whipping through the air with a low hum. It scuttled across the ceiling like a streak of white smoke. I watched as for every inch it advanced, the concrete ceiling was gouged with fist-sized holes by its many hands, debris clattering down in a shower. The machine gunner raised his weapon to fire upward, but the creature moved too fast. Each time the gun's muzzle flare chased after it, it had already leaped to another corner. It swung the steel channel in its hand as if it were a slender wooden stick. The steel channel whistled through the air and struck 2 team members who were leaning against a mine cart. I saw them, along with their fully loaded backpacks, sent flying. They crashed into a heavy-duty iron or cart in the distance, the impact sounding like 2 heavy sacks of flour hitting a wall. The cart, loaded with rocks, was knocked sideways, sliding several meters from the force. When the 2 team members hit the ground, I saw their bodies were already misshapen. The once sturdy tactical backpacks were smashed to pieces by that single blow. The thick iron cart had a massive dent on its side. The steel plate cracked deeply in several places. The 2 men lay on the ground, limbs twitching, half their bodies embedded in the cart's metal from the force of the strike. The creature didn't descend. It shifted its posture on the ceiling, curling its body into a ball. All 6 of its arms were now tucked against its chest, making it look like a massive white sphere. This stance gave it the appearance of a heavy machine ready to launch at any moment. I retreated to the corner, my hand brushing against something cold, a support beam it had twisted earlier. That's when I noticed a fine layer of sweat emerging on its back. The sweat trickled down its white shell, hitting the floor not with the sound of droplets, but with a sizzling, corrosive thud. Small, smoking pits formed in the concrete where the acidic sweat landed. The creature's head rotated 180 degrees, its gaze locking directly onto me. Its eyes held no light, only two lifeless pools of gray. It held the steel channel horizontally in front of itself, gripping both ends with two hands, and with a grunt, exerted force. The steel beam, which even a sledgehammer couldn't bend, twisted like a rubber band in its grasp, slowly contorting into an extremely distorted spiral shape. As the sound of the steel channel snapping echoed, it leaped down from the ceiling. It landed right at our only exit, its two thickest arms spread wide, bracing against the doorframe on either side. I heard the sound of crumbling walls as the bricks shattered into powder under the grip of its hands. It stood there, blocking the way, its six arms forming a massive net, sealing off every possible escape route for all of us. I glanced down at my legs. The earlier spray of debris had torn several large gashes in my pants. Though I wasn't bleeding much, a searing pain was seeping deep into my bones. The machine gunner was still frantically pulling the trigger, but the barrel of his gun was already glowing red hot, verging on purple. Bullets struck the creature's arms, causing its shell to tremble slightly, but they did nothing to halt its advance. With each step it took, its feet left deep, cracked imprints in the hard concrete floor. The low hum had now escalated into violent tremors. I felt my own heart pounding in rhythm with the shaking ground. This thing had no intention of playing tactical games with us. It was just slowly, methodically advancing, each movement meaning another steel plate or wall would be torn apart by its many hands. I watched as one of its hands reached toward a nearby support column, a solid steel beam meant to prevent the underground mine from collapsing. It wrapped three hands around the beam and, like uprooting a weed from the roadside, yanked it upward. The entire mine ceiling emitted a grating, teeth-chattering sound of rupture, and a massive amount of earth and rock collapsed from above, smashing the last of our lights. The row of iron or carts serving as our final barricade was casually swept aside by the creature, scattering across the floor like empty soda cans. The captain was clutching the radio transceiver, shouting desperately at the top of his lungs. His fingers dug so hard into the plastic casing that they left white marks. He yelled into the dark microphone, "Help! Can anyone hear me? We're on the 5th level underground. There's a huge creature here. Send backup now." But the radio only emitted a harsh, static hiss, like 10,000 mosquitoes buzzing in his ears. He slammed the transceiver to the ground, shattering it into pieces, components scattering everywhere. The machine gunner was completely stunned. His eyes were fixed on the monster, his machine gun still firing wildly into the air. The ammunition had long run out, but his finger remained clamped on the trigger, and he kept muttering incessantly. He was counting the monster's arms. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and with each count, he let out a shrill laugh. He yanked the empty ammunition belt from the gun, wrapped it around his neck, and stumbled backward until his back slammed hard against the rock wall. The monster paid no attention to any of this. It extended 4 of its arms and slowly grasped the thickest steel beam overhead, the one supporting the entire mine ceiling, as thick as a man's thigh. With all 4 arms exerting force at once, like wringing out a towel, it gave a low grunt, and the solid steel beam began to bend and twist. The sound of metal twisting echoed through the mine, making my teeth ache. In that single second, the monster twisted the steel beam into a metal loop. Large chunks of rock began to rain down from the ceiling. The captain suddenly drew his pistol from his waist and fired several shots at the monster's eyes. The bullets struck the hard shell around its eye sockets, splattering yellow fluid, but the creature didn't even flinch. The captain dropped his pistol and stumbled into the darkness on the other side, tripping over the tracks several times as he fled. I saw the machine gunner still counting arms, his helmet fallen into a puddle. Suddenly, he grabbed an empty ammunition crate from the ground and hurled it at the monster like a madman. The crate struck the white shell on the monster's chest with a clang and fell to the ground. One of the monster's arms swept out, and the machine gunner flew sideways like a kite with its string cut, crashing into a stone pillar that hadn't yet collapsed. At that moment, I stared at the monster's chest. Right in the center of its chest, With each heavy breath, a crack slowly opened. The crack was about 2 or 3 fingers wide, and instead of a shell, it revealed a dark red, soft tissue. Every time it inhaled, the crack widened slightly, and when it exhaled, it shrank back. I looked down at my feet. There was a bundle of fragmentation grenades I hadn't had time to use earlier. 5 of them, tightly bound together with tape. I tossed my empty rifle aside. Bending down, I grabbed the bundle of grenades by the pull ring. My hand wouldn't stop trembling. I watched as the monster moved step by step toward the unconscious Kevin. Its 2 large hands raised midair, looking as though it intended to tear him apart. I took a few steps forward, the gravel crunching under my feet. The creature heard the noise. It turned its skinless head slightly, its multiple eyes slanting toward me at once. It let out a low roar that made my chest tighten. It released its grip on Kevin and instead aimed all 6 arms at me. I didn't retreat. I clenched the bundle of grenades tightly in my hand, my thumb already hooked around the safety pin's ring. I began to run around the wrecked mine carts, while the monster crawled swiftly across the ceiling, following my shadow. I spotted a row of thin drainage pipes nearby and slid down them to a lower slope. The monster leaped down, landing less than 3 meters away from me, its 6 arms spread out on the ground like a massive white net. I saw the crack on its chest open once more, wider than before due to its recent exertion, revealing something pulsating inside. I yanked the fuse. Hiss, that was the sound of the fuse igniting. I didn't throw it immediately. Instead, clutching the smoking bundle of grenades, I charged straight at the creature. 2 of its arms swung toward my head. I ducked low, sliding forward across the slime on the ground. Just as its claws nearly hooked the back of my collar, I stretched out my arm and, with all my strength, shoved the bundle of white smoking grenades into the crack on its chest. My fingers brushed against something warm and sticky inside. The monster let out a piercing shriek, its remaining 4 hands clawing frantically at its chest, trying to pull out the grenades. Using the momentum from my slide, I scrambled between its thick legs and lunged toward a large pile of rocks in the distance. At that moment, all I could hear was the sound of the monster madly pounding its chest. Its hands, in its frantic haste, collided with each other, producing dull, thudding sounds. The crack in its chest was torn wider by its own claws, and several pieces of its white shell were ripped away. I lay behind the pile of rocks, clamping my hands tightly over my ears, my mouth agape, eyes fixed on the white figure raging in the darkness. The surrounding buzzing suddenly ceased at that very second. This silence was terrifying, as if all the wind underground had come to a standstill. I saw the monster suddenly straighten its back, its 6 arms rigidly extending outward, while a blinding red light seeped from the crack in its chest. It was the precursor to the grenade's explosion, the glow illuminating its shell like a piece of translucent white jade. I pressed my head firmly against the ground and closed my eyes. I felt the earth begin to tremble violently, a sign of that terrifying force building up. Then, a scorching wind swept over my back, carrying the thick scent of gunpowder and an indescribable foul stench. I even felt several shattered pieces of white shell strike the back of my bulletproof vest, the impact sending pain reverberating through my entire body. The explosion wasn't over yet. I could hear a final, muffled sound erupting from the monster's throat. It wasn't a cry from the creature, but the explosion happening inside its body. The entire mine chamber began to shake violently, and more rocks collapsed from above, burying the corner where we had been moments before. I lay there, not daring to move, only able to hear my own heartbeat pounding like a drum in my ears. It took a long while before I dared to slightly open my eyes. Everything in front of me was shrouded in gray smoke, making it impossible to see clearly. I reached out to touch the rocks beside me, only to find my palm covered in a dark yellow, sticky fluid that stretched into long, viscous strands. I tried moving my leg, and a sharp pain shot through me, but I knew I was still alive. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked toward the monster's direction. Amid the lingering black smoke, a massive figure was still trembling faintly. Before the black smoke had fully dissipated, I heard an ear-piercing shriek, a sound like hundreds of metal barrels scraping against the ground, making my skull ache. Crouched behind the rock pile, I watched the white figure thrashing wildly in the smoke. The bundle of grenades had exploded in its chest. By all logic, any living thing should have been blown apart, yet it still hadn't fallen. In the flickering light of the flames, I caught a clear glimpse of the monster. The crack in its chest was blown to pieces, the edges of its grayish-white shell shattered, revealing clumps of dark, twitching flesh inside. That dark yellow fluid dripped down its 6 arms, hitting the ground and releasing wisps of white smoke. Its lowest pair of arms had been severed, the broken ends covered in splintered, wood-like spikes. The machine gunner seemed to have gone mad at that moment. He pulled out another magazine from somewhere, roaring as he unleashed a barrage of fire at the monster's head. Stern rat-a-tat-tat. Rat-a-tat-tat. Asterisk bullets struck the monster's face, splattering dark yellow liquid everywhere. The impact forced its head back, and its remaining 4 arms slammed into the ground, propelling its body like a giant spring as it lunged toward the machine gunner. The movement was so fast I couldn't even process it. All I heard was a whooshing sound. Before the machine gunner could reposition himself, one of the monster's massive hands seized the barrel of the machine gun. I watched as the barrel, glowing red-hot from the gunfire, bent like a limp strip of jerky in the monster's grip. With a forceful twist and a sickening crack, the entire machine gun was snapped in 2. The machine gunner was flung backward by the monstrous force, crashing into a mine pillar behind him with a dull thud. I quickly rolled to the side, grabbing an automatic rifle someone had dropped on the ground. I opened fire on the monster's back, bullets pitting its white shell with small craters. The monster turned its head, its lifeless eyes fixed on me, its remaining 4 arms flailing wildly in the air, sweeping nearby iron frames and scattering them across the ground. It opened its massive mouth and let out a roar directed at me. I saw rows upon rows of densely packed, sharp teeth filling its maw. It suddenly raised one of its right arms and swung it toward the rock pile where I was hiding. The force behind that punch was unimaginable. The 100-pound rock I had been using for cover was shattered into debris. Shards of stone shot toward me like bullets, tearing several gashes in my bulletproof vest. Ignoring the pain, I desperately crawled toward Kevin. Kevin was still sprawled on the ground, his broken arm twisted at a strange angle. The creature clearly wasn't done with us. It scurried across the floor on all 4s, each movement cracking the ground beneath it. I backed away, firing, and hurled a grenade right under its feet. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, the blast threw me backward, filling my mouth with dirt. The monster staggered, one of its legs blown clean off, yet it clung to the wall with its remaining hands, dangling in midair. Its 6 arms now stretched unnaturally long, whipping toward me like massive, frenzied tentacles. One strike landed on the rail beside me, gouging a deep dent into the steel. While it struggled to regain balance, I grabbed Kevin by the collar and dragged him back with everything I had. My boots slipped in the slime, each step a battle. The captain wasn't idle either. He snatched up a few fuel canisters, lit them, and hurled them at the creature. Flames erupted instantly. Fire was its weakness. It writhed in the air, emitting an ear-splitting screech. Its pale shells crackled in the heat, sounding like red-hot stones hitting cold water. Then it fell from the wall, crashing heavily onto a pile of abandoned mine carts. The carts crumpled under its weight, metal groaning and twisting. Seizing the moment, I lit our last bundle of explosives. Gritting through the pain in my leg, I lunged forward and shoved it beneath a buckling support column, the one holding up the entire 5th level of the mine. Run! I yelled to the captain and the machine gunner. Dragging Kevin, I bolted for the elevator shaft. Behind us, the explosives detonated. The tunnel shook violently, followed by a deafening roar as hundreds of tons of rock collapsed. The creature was still howling. I glanced back and saw it propping up a massive boulder with 3 of its arms. Its shells splintered with a bone-chilling crunch, dark yellow fluid gushing out like a fountain. It tried to claw its way free, but more rubble rained down on its back. Rumble, the entire chamber caved in. A tidal wave of dust and debris blasted us forward. I slammed into the elevator gate, my head hitting the iron rails hard enough to white out my vision. Still gripping Kevin, I shoved him into the elevator cage. The captain, face smeared with grime, sprinted over and hit the ascent switch. The elevator groaned into motion. I watched the shaft below fill with rubble. Just as we rose, I thought I heard a low, heavy thud from the depths, as if the creature was still pounding against the stones trapping it. Lying on the elevator floor, I gulped in the slightly cleaner air. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, that slimy feeling clinging no matter how hard I wiped them. Kevin was still unconscious, but his breathing was steady. As we climbed higher, the darkness below finally began to fade. I looked down at my chest. The ballistic plate inside my vest had shattered into pieces from the blast. I pulled out the fragments and tossed them into the corner. Each piece was stained with that foul, corroding fluid. Only the clanking of the elevator chains broke the silence. I remembered the creature's chest blown open, a structure that shouldn't exist in this world. Its strength, its shells, those 6 arms that could twist steel beams like rope. I stared at my own hands, caked with black grime and blood. The sun probably hadn't even set outside, but I felt like I'd spent a lifetime in the dark. The elevator finally reached the surface. A cool breeze swept in, making me shiver. I helped the captain carry Kevin out and laid him on the flat ground near the mine entrance. Turning back, I looked into that bottomless black pit, smoke still curling from its depths. I knew the rubble wouldn't hold that thing for long. No pile of rocks could contain that kind of power. Sitting on the grass, I still couldn't let go of my rifle, even though it was empty. In the distance, the sound of rescue helicopters grew closer, the steady thrum of rotor blades cutting the air. I looked up at the sky, the brightness hurting my eyes. When I closed them, all I could hear was the sound of metal twisting, over and over, echoing without end. I reached into my pocket, hoping to find a cigarette, only to discover the pack had long been crushed flat. The captain sat beside me, staring at his own hands. His palms were crisscrossed with deep gashes from gripping the radio, but he seemed completely numb to the pain. None of us looked toward the mine shaft, we all knew. The commotion below had stopped, but that putrid stench would likely linger in our nostrils for the rest of our lives. The shadow of the helicopter fell over us. I watched as the neatly uniformed rescue team jumped from the aircraft, carrying advanced equipment and stretchers. Suddenly, all of it looked incredibly fragile, like Kevin's shield, bent into a V shape. The kind of force that could twist solid steel beams like twine was not something these little gadgets could withstand. I leaned my head against the stretcher and closed my eyes. My mind was filled with the image of that huge white creature crawling sideways across the roof. Its 6 arms still swayed before my eyes, each one radiating a ferocity that seemed intent on smashing everything to pieces. I felt someone tugging at my arm, probably trying to examine my wounds, but I just clutched myself tightly. That low, buzzing hum, it still hadn't faded. I sat by the helicopter's open door, the wind whipping dust into my face. Kevin lay on a stretcher, his left arm already immobilized in a white brace. I glanced down. The arm was now only half its usual thickness. The bones inside completely shattered into fragments that pushed up against his combat suit in chaotic little bumps. When the medics cut away his sleeve, I saw a few pale, jagged pieces of bone fall from the fabric and land on the helicopter's metal floor with a faint clink. 3 grayish shell fragments were embedded in my own leg. They were as thick as fingernails, their edges sharp as razor blades. I pulled one out and found it coated in a dark yellow mucus that smelled like a basket of fish left to rot for a week. As the fragment came free, it brought out a bit of blackish filth that immediately burned a small hole in my pant leg. The captain sat across from me, pulling something from his pocket. It was a piece he'd picked up in the mine, one of the creature's fingers, as thick as a large radish and encased in a thick, hard shell. He weighed it in his palm. The thing was unnaturally heavy, like a solid lump of lead. The broken end showed no red blood, only clumps of gray, dried glue-like sludge. The helicopter began to ascend, and I looked down through the window at the mine entrance. The once circular opening was now completely collapsed, nothing but a pile of rubble. In the very center of the debris, I could see a large, shell-covered hand protruding. It gripped a multi-ton boulder, its nails sunk deep into the stone, carving 5 trenches over a dozen centimeters deep into the rock surface. I touched my face and felt a thick layer of dried black powder. I set my empty rifle down beside my feet. The barrel bore several clear fingerprints left by the creature. The steel pipe twisted out of shape. I looked down at my own tactical gear, torn to shreds and caked in black soil and that yellowish fluid from below. The rescue team was talking loudly nearby, but I couldn't make out a single word. I just stared at the scattered bone fragments rattling on the floor and the heavy gray finger in the captain's hand. The helicopter climbed higher, and the mining area below shrank to a tiny black dot. I leaned my head against the cabin wall and gazed at the deep crimson-purple sunset on the horizon. Gone. All of it gone.